Max. Thanks for joining us today to talk to us about your work. I'm really excited to have you.
Yeah, really great to meet you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to jump on this podcast.
Okay, so before we dive into the details of the paper, so this is LSM2 learning from incomplete wearable sensor data. I'm really excited to talk about this. As I'm sure you're aware, the wearable health market is booming. People are interested more than ever in keeping tabs on their kind of holistic health and their personal health insights. Um, Obviously, a challenge with that, or a way to do that, is through wearables, and a challenge is reliable data, and that's what we're going to dive into. But first, how did you get into this space? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So I did my undergrad at Johns Hopkins, and when I went there, I was really convinced that I wanted to be a doctor. And then after I took a few too many bio classes, I was like, wow, I really hate biology, I hate medicine. I cannot do this. I suck at memorizing stuff. Um, but then I took like a few machine learning classes. I was like, wait, oh, this is super cool. And so what I realized during my undergrad, I was like, oh, maybe I want to do some sort of machine learning with health related stuff.
Mhm.
And I kind of fell into this wearable space, meeting up with my current advisor, Dr. James M. Ray. And we basically talked about how one of the big problems within the U.S. is healthcare, right? Healthcare is ever-rising cost of like our GDP, the percentage of GDP is only increasing, but the way our healthcare system currently works is it's very reactive instead of
Mm.
proactive. It's very much like dominated by chronic diseases such as like cardiovascular diseases, and the issue is they're very, very treatable, but only treatable like many, many years before it actually becomes a problem. So wearables is really, really exciting because it kind of hits on the behavioral aspect of kind of what you said, in which you're like, trying to keep track of your behavior, trying to make sure you're doing healthy things and these small things. And so wearable technology and mobile health really gives us an avenue to move the needle on our healthcare problem, to help address problems before they become such a big issue. And so that's kind of like how I fell in love with like machine learning for like wearable sensors, and it's been a really exciting journey.
What's the problem space like? So that's the sort of like the big problem that kind of captured your interest, I guess.
Yeah.
What's the problem space with wearable data?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of problems with it. So like, and I guess like because you brought me on to talk about my paper specifically, um, the one big problem within wearables is specifically the missingness and noise present. It's something that one, the larger like machine learning community doesn't super appreciate networking in wearables, and two, it's something that like even the people within wearables, like I think they appreciate it a lot, but they don't. It's hard to actually use machine learning insights to um, actually get something actionable out of it because you need so much data, so much compute to make it happen. And specifically, what I mean is um, when you're having wearable sensors, especially when it's consumer grade, like I don't know, Beth with her like Pixel Watch won't really care about like how well she's wearing the Pixel Watch to like make sure she's like maintaining
Mhm.
contact with the skin, or like Joe with their like I don't know Aura ring is like wearing like taking off the Aura ring, putting it back on, or in general, what I'm trying to say is like consumers will use these wearable devices however they want, and that's fine because it's a consumer device. But it makes using machine learning insights on them like much more difficult
Mhm.
because like there's so much missingness present, and it's especially an issue because like machine learning algorithms in general expect like complete data. This is kind of like what I was talking about before. A lot of machine learning has really evolved very quickly within the computer vision and natural language fields, because there's just so much data available, and it's generally complete, generally clean. We can make the argument of like whether certain data is clean or not clean, but it's a different paradigm from wearables in which data might be just completely missing.
Mhm.
Um, and it's very tricky to deal with, especially since I talked about how consumers may wear their devices incorrectly, but also there's strategic decisions within the sensing algorithms to like turn off a sensor or turn it back on just to save battery life. Like for example, it might not make sense for you to continuously be collecting motion data when you're sleeping because you're sleeping.
Right.
That's just like an example. The point is the missingness is like hugely pervasive within the wearable space, and it's something to like that's like very difficult to appreciate too unless you're at like one of these big companies like Apple and Google in which they have all this data and they're trying to do stuff. Because if you're like in a small academic center and you have like wearable data, generally you can like tell your participants and be like, hey, make sure you're wearing that watch correctly.
Right. Right.
Or
Right.
it's
And like a study, like,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But in order for us to like actually do large scale training with this real world field data, we need to find like a nice way to try to address all this missingness and noise that's present.
All right. And then, so what do people do prior to this paper? We're going to talk about your novel approach, but what are the strategies that people use prior
Yeah.
to this?
So like I think classically it's like I think missingness, like I said, it's not a sexy problem to work on. It's not something people really care about because like you have data, you want to do something with that data to predict something with it. If you have missingness or noise, it's really annoying, and you just want to like fix it and move on and do whatever like cool thing afterwards.
Right.
It's yeah. And so generally what the field has kind of done is imputation. And so imputation, like in simple imputation is just filling in missingness. So, and there's a lot of very straightforward, naive ways to do it, and they generally work okay. Like if you're missing an entire like block of time, just put in the mean of the data, or like put in like the time right before it was missing, time that it was asked for missing, and just fit a line, and then you're done with it. Or just like sometimes there's like more complicated methods. I don't want to go too much into the technical details, but you can train specific like algorithms to like learn correlations between channels and such to fill in the missingness. But the overall issue with all these methods is when you're filling in missingness and you're just like putting in something there, that's something can bias the signal, right? Because you're training the machine learning algorithm to do some sort of prediction. But what if the way that you're like doing that imputation is completely like off? What if it's like completely different from what we're expecting? Then you can completely like throw off the results of your downstream prediction because of the way that you've done this imputation. And it's like a pretty well studied phenomenon within the missingness domain, which is like composed of like 5 people probably total. Sorry, missingness people, please don't get mad at me. But like essentially the concern is when you fill in missingness, you're making assumptions of how that missingness occurred.
Right.
So the issue once again is sometimes it being missing is really informative. Like as I said before, when you're sleeping, one example is you might not want to collect you might not want to collect motion data when you're sleeping because it's a waste of battery life. But because it's missing, it's like, oh, this gives us a signal. What if this person is probably sleeping? Or, you know, a host of other different ideas. But the point is, like, the missingness being present itself is, like, really informative. And it's unfortunate because a lot of the field has either treats missingness as, like, a small pre-processing task in which you just want to fill it in and move on, or
Right.
it's you have to like make all these strong mathematical assumptions to say like, oh, the missingness occurred completely at random. And because it at random, then I can use this specific method that satisfies this specific theoretical property. And then once again, these five people that work in missingness are like really happy because it's like, yes, we solved these assumptions. And it's basically it's a difficult field, and it's hard to innovate on because of these different limitations.
And it's hard to, well, okay, so let's go into what your approach is. So you have, this is the second generation large sensor model,
Hmm.
um, and based on this novel training strategy, adaptive and inherited masking.
Hmm.
Define the approach for us.
Yeah, so it builds off of a prior masking approach called masked autoencoder. And masked autoencoder is a relatively simple idea, and it's It's important how simple it is because that's what makes it so powerful. And originally developed within the image domain, it's literally just let's remove parts of the signal and then reconstruct it afterwards. And then if we can do that, then we have a strong representation. I've boiled down some details, but essentially that's how it works. But the point is, because it was originally developed in the image domain, there isn't like inherent missingness present within images. Generally, like I said, images are complete. Maybe they're like noisy and blurry, but they're not missing. They're always there. If I take an image of a dog, it's still an image of a dog, even if I like shake the camera around and it's all blurry. Um, in the case of wearables, the data might just be gone forever and there's no signals at all. So the innovation in AIM, the adaptive inherited masking, is when we're doing an MAE approach, we can include the existing missingness within the mass tokens that we're removing, so that when we're learning our mass token, when we're learning how to reconstruct missingness, we have the artificially introduced missingness as well as the existing missingness. And so by including both of them together, we allow our model to be cognizant of what the original inherent missingness is. So essentially teaching our model how to respect the original signal. And because we're teaching the model how to respect the original signal, then we can much better have like stronger performance under like strong missingness conditions, which once again are very, very, very ubiquitous within our setting. And part of AIM, so that's like one part of AIM. The other part of AIM is we develop some cool engineering tricks to like make it scalable and useful even outside of like these in like a wearable domain as well.
And so, how does that solve or address, anyway, some of the challenges that you mentioned, like bias?
Yeah, so I think the key is um, when we're doing the downstream classification or the downstream tasks in general, prior approaches would once again impute and then learn a representation on the imputed data,
Hmm.
and then do the reconstruction. So the point is the representation is directly dependent on the imputed data. It's directly dependent on however you did this imputation. Our method, because we don't actually try to do imputation, because we use a learned mass token, we completely ignore the existing missingness and just train a representation based off of only the data that's present there.
This is the second generation. How does this build on what was done in LSM1?
Yeah, so LSM1 did once again the very unsexy thing, which is impute. Like we have missingness, whatever. We'll use mean imputation. We'll fill it in with a mean. Who cares? Let's get the cool insights. And essentially, LSM1 was very, very powerful because it helps show scaling performance of these wearable foundation models. So it shows the more data and the more compute that you throw at a model, the better it is. And so that's a really,
Mhm.
really like useful and powerful finding. But then we show like when you can actually model the missingness, building, then we can get even better performance and even better scalability.
And probably more accurate, like
Yeah.
insights on what's actually happening.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then like one way concretely that's kind of seen is if you look at some of our results at the end of the paper, essentially it's like if you artificially introduce new missingness, like if you artificially remove the like a sensor like the PPG sensor or the accelerometry sensor, if you remove these sensors, then performance drops obviously. But for the LSM1, because it did not quote unquote respect the missingness, it drops a lot. It significantly
Mm.
drops. But our approach, because we respect the missingness, it does drop, but not as significantly. And the places where it does drop significantly are actually really, really interesting and insightful. They kind of like reflect clinical significance because
Yeah.
it's if we drop like all nighttime data, then the hypertension prediction drops significantly, and that's really, really cool because like within the literature we see that nighttime biosignals are much more useful for predicting hypertension compared to daytime. So yeah.
Right. Okay. And so I'm curious about this is just sort of from my understanding. So in the prior work section, you mentioned how existing representation learning works for incomplete data,
Hmm.
and that, but it's mainly focused on tabular data
Hmm.
or irregularly sampled data. But wearables are regularly sampled. Why does that matter? The regularity in which the data comes.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that I think the community in general, unless you're within this space, unless you're working on missingness and you're working on wearable data, it's something like very difficult to respect, and so we've gone down from 5 people to like 2 people. So yeah, so thank you for asking the question. It's a good question. But essentially, when you have like missing tabular data, for example, um, there's so much signal to help reconstruct the original like missingness. There's so much information like across features and across like people, because within tabular data, there's a lot of correlations that you can use within it, because it's
Right.
like it's defining a very specific feature, generally a feature that you'll care
Okay.
about. But when you have missingness within wearable sensors, it's so much more tricky, because the wearable sensors and sensors in general like capture information about someone's physiology. We don't even 100% understand what's going on with people's physiology in general. Like, I think, we have a high level understanding. Like, we know that, for example, a PPG sensor captures the amount of blood volume going through like a specific area.
Hmm.
But very nuanced relationships, like how how much we swing our arms, how does that translate into the bullet volume and other stuff, it's not exactly understood, like why or how like these sensors are correlated with each other. And I think importantly within this domain we have like this time domain as well.
Right.
We need a model not only information across different modalities, across different features, but also across time, because it's like if someone like always goes running at 5 p.m., then that's important to know that like at 5 p.m. someone's always running. You can't just use that in isolation. You can't just like you have to use that information like, oh, 5 p.m., that means their heart rate is probably increased here. So like being able to respect that within the missingness is quite difficult. So that's kind of like the comparison to tabular.
Right. So Remasker you mentioned in the paper as the most relevant work, and you state that your approach differs in three main ways. Talk to us a little bit about what Remasker is and then the deviation in your
Yeah, so
approach.
Remasker, I think this is like the key thing that I was talking about. Remasker was on tabular data, and
Okay.
once again they had 100 tokens at once, whereas we're trying to model like thousands of tokens at once. And then two, their approach is for like this imputation kind of paradigm. And so once
Hmm.
again, like they have data. Sometimes it's like missing for some reason, but it's in tabular data generally like stuff is just missing like one at a time. So once again, pretty easy to understand relationships. We're missing entire modalities, entire chunks, and so it's pretty difficult to compare. I think we've gotten pushback from reviewers before of saying like, hey, like this seems similar, but
Hmm.
it's very very different, because we're in a much more complex kind of scenario, and we're also trying to learn representations. So our primary goal is not for reconstruction. Our primary goal is learning a representation on the data that respects the missingness. Like
Okay.
we're not trying to just necessarily reconstruct. Whereas that original paper was just focused on like how can we reconstruct imputation data, or how can we just reconstruct tabular data.
Hmm.
We're trying to say like, hey, if we can learn a representation here that we can use as representation and predict hypertension, we can use it to predict like insulin resistance. We can use it to predict like anxiety. We can use it to predict like a wide variety of different downstream tasks in a more like foundation model esque approach.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, because in order to accurate, like be able to make those kind of health predictions, you need to be able to explain what you're doing with the data that's or how you're doing it, how
Mm-hmm.
you're coming up with those things, particularly if there's data that's missing what assumptions are being made
Exactly.
in
Exactly.
order for like a healthcare for like for a clinical use for
Mm-hmm.
sure. What experiments did you set up for this? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So it kind of alludes to some of the experiment that I talked about like in the beginning, in which it's kind of like let's remove all of the data from the accelerometry sensor and see how our model does. The nighttime data and see how it does. And in general, we see like when we have this like targeted missingness experiments, then we get like much stronger performance with our like LSM2 approach. The bulk of the results actually within the paper, in which
Okay.
when we do hypertension prediction or anxiety prediction or age regression, stuff like that, that's all done on the raw real world data, which has a lot existing missingness present. So all the different results that we demonstrate all have like this real world missingness already
Oh,
present.
okay.
So we are showing like the performance gains that we get. It's just interesting seeing like when specific modalities or things are dropped, like how robust we are specifically. So yeah.
All right. And so then in the real world data or the real world scenarios in your results, did anything in particular surprise you? Is the hypertension thing is I think interesting that the sleep is more important than the
Yeah. I think the sleep thing was most important. Also, I will say, uh, give me a second. I have a specific line. This research presents preliminary findings and should not be interpreted as providing diagnostic tools or recommendations.
Okay.
To be clear.
Yeah, let's be
um,
clear on that.
um, none of this is inside product yet. I think we're investigating, and
Mhm.
I'll leave it at that. So in terms of some stuff that's exciting, we got some feedback that was like, hey, what if these naive methods that are turning on imputed data are doing badly just because you're using like a weak imputation method, right? And I think that's valid. There's like basically the argument is like LSM2 only does better because because you're using such naive imputation methods for the methods that depend on imputation. So we're like, okay, let's run an experiment. So initially, like all the data is currently imputed with a linear interpolation. So that what that means is if this point is present, and this point is present, and everything in between is missing, we just fit a line. You just fit a
Yeah.
line in whatever things are missing. So it's like, okay, fine. What if we now instead use a quadratic interpolation? So instead of a line, it uses like a quadratic function, which is like x squared instead of x. And what we show is like when we use a more complex imputation methodology, it results in like worse performance, like significantly worse performance. It's one of the reasons why people just use simple imputation methods nowadays, because like the simpler you do it, the like you won't. We know that at least we won't introduce bias, but it's like a shame because it's so simple. But it's you're kind of like stuck between a hard and stuck between a rock and a hard place. So that's why like our method's kind of cool because like you don't need to think about what kind of imputation method you need to use in order to like make sure you have complete data. You can just use our method naively, just so that it'll just be trained on only the present data and remove all like existing missingness. There,
What are the implications of the results?
yeah. So implications wise, I think it has a huge implication within like the within the wearable field where we have so much ubiquitous missingness. Like I said in the past, most of the time people just used imputation as something just to quickly do, but I think it's pretty clear that the way that you actually handle that missingness has a um, very significant effect on the actual downstream performance. So whether you do it in whether you do it like in the LSM2 way, in which you explicitly model it, or you like I don't know, try some other methodologies. It's definitely something that needs to be respected to actually be addressed in a very like clear way to prevent introducing biases. Like it's fine, like if you're just doing like a machine learning paper in which like, oh, we're trying to benchmark performance of this model versus that model. Like, sure, whatever. Like as long as you're using the same imputation method for both models, it's like whatever. Because it's like, it's a controlled variable. But if we're trying to like deploy this into the real world and to like make like strong, like far-reaching impact, and we're trying to like not introduce any biases and achieving the maximal performance, then it's definitely something to keep in mind in order to like address. And it's especially tricky in this new day and age in which we have like machine learning is and AI is like pretty scary because of how it can like disenfranchise and like bias like different groups and stuff. Imputation, while being like a small like missingness, while being like a small aspect, is something that could potentially like impact that kind of idea. So it's something to, I guess, be aware of in terms of like handling how the missingness is actually treated within our machine learning algorithms.
What would you say are the major limitations of the work as it stands now?
Yeah, I guess speaking less about the methodology, maybe more specifically about our paper. Like our paper, like we evaluated on like our internal Google data sets that we have available to us. I think it'd be really cool for the research community if it was something public. And so being able to have like a public benchmark is always like great, because like it helps motivate and like push the field forward in terms of having like a solid target to try to hit. And I think that's like there are like large scale open source data sets available, like called All of Us. So
Mhm.
being able to work more within that to open source and hit on that is one weakness of the original paper. But we are making efforts actually to to open source our model and some of our data sets. So I think that's like quite exciting.
Stepping a little bit away from the meat of the paper, I'm just curious, how do you think models like this, like LSM2, or approaches like LSM2, can be integrated into healthcare?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I don't want a lot of doctors coming to go attack me as well. Like I already have the missingness people mad at me. So I'll answer this broadly, like how wearable machine learning will impact the health field, and I think it's like very very exciting, because it's not in a way to kind of replace doctors, but it's very much like you don't see doctors 24/7. You probably see your primary physician once a year for like 10 minutes, and they're like, oh, okay, you're good, and then you leave. And I think as a symptom of our healthcare system, but also I think it's difficult to kind of deal with, and it's something that like wearables in general are trying to solve and work through, and it's quite exciting, because what I mean specifically to is like, for example, just recently the Apple Watch released the hypertension detection feature, and that's super super exciting, because like many people will go throughout their life not even knowing they have hypertension until it's like probably too late. And so this kind of
Mhm.
goes into like the proactive idea that I was like talking about at the start of our call. So like this like hypertension prediction, super super exciting, because we're not just trying to we're not trying to replace doctors' jobs, but we're trying to help enhance people's like life and health in general. And then also, for example, the Pixel Watch's loss of pulse detection. Like wearables are very very powerful for temporally precise interventions. It's like small stuff like I
Like
saw that
fall
you have.
detection.
Yeah, exactly. And I saw you
Yeah.
had an Apple Watch. Like it has like a stand reminder, which I've turned off my stand reminder because I find it too annoying. But it's really really useful, because it's been shown that the stand reminders causally increase the amount that people stand, which is really
Mhm.
nice, because like that has links to like better health outcomes.
Yeah, it gives an individual more ownership
Exactly.
over their health and their
Exactly.
well-being.
Yeah.
What would be really cool is if that data then got sent to your primary care
Yeah.
provider,
No.
if it was accurate enough, so then they could say, "Hey, we've noticed, whatever change, and
Exactly.
maybe you should come in and get some blood work done or something." I
No,
don't know.
that's exactly like that's like exactly what the hypertension feature on the Apple Watch is designed to do, because it's like, hey, you have hypertension, go see your doctor, but
Right.
like showing the data specifically. I agree as well. I think we're that's more like a UX problem, I think, in my opinion. Like, how can you present
Right.
data in like a meaningful way that a doctor can understand it? Um, So that is, but that's something that's like actively being worked on because it's I think I'm working with a professor at Stanford, and she was telling me about this work in which you can have a continuous glucose monitor
Right.
sent to you, and then like every this is part of a study, but like every week a doctor would like look at your continuous glucose and write a note about it. But eventually in the future, like ideally you can train a model on this continuous glucose monitoring and then summarize like what it looks like and then give that to a doctor to like do something actionable with it.